So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Günter Verheugen, Vice President of the European Commission, and have the honor and the privilege to moderate the panel debate of this afternoon. Quite comfortable for me, because normally I should present the views, nor I can ask important guests to present their views. I'm very happy about that. And I would like to start to introduce our guests. On the left side, we have Patricia Hewitt, well-known Minister of the United Kingdom, Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, and the Cabinet Minister for Women. She is a member of the House of Commons since 1997, has two teenage children, and is nobody's babe, which is a very important point. And she plays a very important role at the European scene, and I expect some experience from her. Next to her, we have Angela Merkel. She is the leader of the opposition in Germany, a chairperson of the Christian Democratic Union and the Christian Democratic Parliamentary Group. If I may say that, in my view, the most likely challenger to Chancellor Schröder next year, still leading in the opinion poll, so it might be extremely interesting to listen to her views. She is from East Germany. In fact, I think presently the only politician from East Germany in a leading political role of that kind in Germany. And if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Merkel, you are a physician, yeah? And studied natural sciences. To my left side, we have our guest from the United States, Henry McKinnell, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Pfizer, which I must not introduce, biggest pharmaceutical company of the world. He is a member of the foundation board of the World Economic Forum, but he has a very interesting hobby horse, and that brings him close to Europe. He is a collector of fine wines. And in that case, of course, he would not need the pills he is producing, because wine is extremely healthy. From Henry McKinnell, we expect some provocative views from the other side of the Atlantic. And we have, to his left side, Klaus Zumwinkel. He is the chairman of the board of management of a German-based global company, which has an extremely interesting history. It's Deutsche Post, which is now a leading logistical company worldwide. When I was a child, German Post was still a state authority, and the people there, even those who brought you the letters, were officials, state officials. And Mr. Zumwinkel's extremely difficult task was to transform a state service, Deutsche Post, with several hundred thousand people, and probably some 100,000 too many on board, to transform that into a business, a real business. And as far as I can see it, he was extremely successful. I thought it could be useful to make only one short remark on the issue of our afternoon, the question where the European growth engine should be and why we don't have one. I think we know exactly where the European problems and European weaknesses are. We have a strategy to create growth and employment that didn't work. The Lisbon objective to catch up with the Americans by 2010, yeah, even to be better than the Americans by 2010 in terms of productivity, growth and employment will not be met. That is absolutely clear. The Commission next week will present a new strategy, a revised Lisbon strategy, and we will not say that we have the view that we can be better than the Americans by 2010, but we hope that we can change the tendency. The problem that we have is a problem of priorities. We have too many priorities, and therefore we have none. It is a problem of delivery. Our political decision-making system is too complicated and too slow. There was no clear sense of ownership, no clear sense of responsibility. There was no clear division of labor between member states of the European Union and the community. I think we know pretty well what we need to do in Europe in order to improve our performance. That will be discussed in our panel. From the Commission's point of view, I would only like to say that for us, the key word for the future is competitiveness. And this is not a technical word. Competitiveness is a political program. It means that you accept competition as the most important constitutive element for a market economy. It implies that you accept the market as a decisive force where companies must compete. It implies that you reduce the role of the state. The state is not responsible for management decisions. The state should see its role as creating an environment in which business activities can be performed in the best possible way. My friend José Manuel Barroso, the President of the Commission, went so far to say the new Commission wants to create a business-friendly environment, and I fully share that view. We will present the new strategy next Wednesday. Some far-reaching ideas will be there, and later in the discussion, I hope that I will have an opportunity to come back to that. Now, let me start. And I thought it would be useful to ask our American guest to present his views. But I have a special question for you, Ms. McKinnell. If you were in my position, responsible for the competitiveness of the European economy and for enterprises and industry, what would be the first step you would take?
Well, in fact, my first step would be the step you have already taken or about to take, which would be to re-emphasize the objectives of the Lisbon agenda, which was to make Europe the world's most competitive knowledge-based industry. Let me say that again, to make Europe the world's most competitive knowledge-based industry. Clearly, we're not achieving that. And I think the key to success in your position is really to recognize that when a strategy is not working, more of the same is probably not the solution. So we need to do things differently. So what would I recommend you do differently? Well, I find it fascinating that over the last decade or so, we've run a very large experiment in a very large knowledge-based industry, which is healthcare, about 15% of the research done in Europe. And the results are crystal clear. The United States relied on free markets and competition to regulate and grow the industry. Europe has relied on government regulation. Now, 10 years ago, the research in the life sciences was about equal in Europe and the United States. Today, the U.S. research spending is twice that of Europe. And in the products that are being produced, 10 years ago, Europe and the United States both produced about a third of the new products being introduced into the market around the world. Today, Europe's share is down to 20% and falling, and the U.S. share is over 60%. So we've run the experiment. The results are in. I think it's pretty clear that relying on government regulation is destroying this industry in Europe. Now, having said all that, local governments have different objectives. Your objective at the European Commission is competitiveness, jobs, growth. Many of the local companies are putting control of cost ahead of investments in job and growth. And the struggle I see in your position, and I'm on your side on this, is how do we implement the European agenda when member states have a different set of objectives? That, to me, is the challenge for you.
Thank you very much. This is a very good opportunity to ask Patricia Hewitt how she looks at this. You are representing a country that is performing better than the average of the European Union. What have you done?
What we've done, I think, over the last 7 years is combine a platform of macroeconomic stability, starting, of course, with independence for the Bank of England, with a whole series of structural reforms, notably of our welfare and social security system, that have brought unemployment down to the lowest level for about 35 years and created an additional, brought into employment an additional 2 million people. And at the same time, and of course partly driving that, seen several 100,000 more businesses established. Now, we're not the only ones in Europe getting it right. There are other countries, notably in the north of Europe, who are also combining that low inflation, low interest rate, low budget deficit macro environment with very high levels of employment and entrepreneurship. So, and it's important, that point, Günter, because as we know, Europeans sometimes feel Britain is trying to lecture the rest of them on how to get this right. But I think the importance of structural reform is absolutely clear from our experience. But the other lesson that I would draw from our experience, which I think is hugely important for this new Commission, we came to power on a mission, if you like, to combine social justice with economic success. And our starting point in a country that had over 3 million people out of work was that a job is the best form of social inclusion. And once we've got somebody into a job, the next task is to get them a better job and so raise their skills. And that whole issue of raising people's skills is absolutely central to the broader competitiveness agenda as well. And there is an argument that we're making, we collectively, and the new Commission very much so, are making, and I think winning, beginning to win, in the rest of the European Union, that what we have to do is pursue those other social and environmental goals, of course, but in ways that enhance competitiveness instead of undermining or threatening to destroy it. And that's where too often individual member states, but also the European Union as a whole, has gone wrong in the past.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Dr. Merkel, as I was said, you will probably be the challenger for the German Chancellor, and perhaps next year already, you might be the leader of the biggest economy in Europe. What would you do in your first 100 days in order to bring the German economy back on track?
First, I have to say that the decision will be taken, but it is not yet taken. Right. But let's imagine I have to influence this 100 days program. Then I would say, I would mention 4 points. The first one is that from my point of view, the innovation enhancement is very important in Germany. People do not understand, and they are also not taught enough from my point of view, that innovation in the driving technological branches in the world is the key that we can keep our living standard. We will never be able to compete in the easy or low-paid jobs. Europe has not a real chance in that. So we have to be the best and compete with the United States and others about being the first. And this is also German's tradition. We built the first car, we invented aspirin, and we built the first computer in the world. So we have a history in that, and people tend to forget about that. And that means that we have to push then the Commission to be more open to gene technologies, to life science, bioscience, that we have to push that we do not get directives which do not help us, which create bureaucracy. I think we have to speak about that as well if we speak about the role of the European Union. Second, structural reforms in the labor market. We did something now together with the government, but it is not yet enough from my point of view. Third, we have to think about the structure of our social systems. In Germany, the social costs are completely bound to the labor force. That means you have a plus of 42% to the salary for each working hour, which is a difficulty in comparison with our Scandinavian neighbors, for instance, or the Netherlands. And so we need there a new structure and more taxes into the system and less binding to the labor costs. And fourth, we need a more competitive tax system. That means an easier, more transparent one for the people, and lower taxes, I guess, if I look to the Middle and Eastern European countries, to our enterprises. And if we take that together, and if we make it together, but innovation as the first step, then I would say the incentive that people from abroad say Germany is again a good investment place could be made. And a last remark, politics in Germany was not accountable. You could not predict it, what happens in the next year. So, and I think for investments, it's very, very difficult, very, very important that you can rely on the country where you go to. And if you have each year a new health reform, if you have each year another tax system, then it's very, very complicated that people from abroad say Germany is the place where we want to go and make investments.
Thank you very much. Mr. Zumwinkel is in a market that was liberalized and privatized only very recently. And perhaps he could tell us a little bit about his experience in a market where competition is a relatively new phenomenon.
I love competition. I come from industry. I think free markets create wealth and not monopolies or bureaucratic regulations. And I think in Germany we had in the beginning of the 90s very good policies and policy makers, and we created what we call postal and telecommunication reforms. So my company was thrown in the cold water pretty early, and we survived, and now we can swim better than the others, I think. And like in Japan, Prime Minister Koizumi wants to bring the bill into the Diet next month, somehow along the same lines as we did it in Germany. So I think that was a good example. So that shows, I mean, I decreased the jobs by 140,000 over many years, but now we are already at 400,000, but now we have nearly 200,000 people outside Germany and 200,000 people inside Germany. So our experience is a good one.
So far for the warming up, and now we come to the real stuff. I think we should start with the problem of overregulation or possible overregulation, red tape, bureaucracy, Brussels as a bureaucratic monster that wants to regulate everything. And again, I think that the experience of our American guest could be useful because he can compare. As the CEO of a global company, is it really true that Europe is overregulated? Is it really true that we have too much red tape? It is too difficult to run the business in Europe. That we do not have a business-friendly environment. What is your experience if you compare your business in Europe with companies in other parts of the world?
Well, I would have said a few years ago, visiting Europe, that the United States was more business-friendly. Unfortunately, the United States is now starting to catch up to Europe in response to some financial corporate scandals of the last few years, and that clearly is going to damage European competitiveness. But I think the key issue is still, do you trust the markets to regulate, or do you trust the bureaucrats to regulate? And I didn't really understand the importance of this question until somebody explained to me about American regulators. It applies to European as well. But they said the problem with regulators is that dogs bark, cows moo, and regulators regulate. That's what they do, and they do it very well. And the result is, and I'll use an example from the pharmaceutical industry, the result in the United States is new pharmaceutical products, the new innovations, the new medicines coming onto the market, the prices are set by the market. When the patent expires, the prices fall by 80% almost immediately. So you have a price level of here while you're in this 10 or so year period of patent protection, and then the price falls by 80%. When the regulators set the price, they don't understand the power of competition. So they set the new product price at about half the price the U.S. market sets. But the key is that price level, that government set price level, is a ceiling for the new products, but it also becomes a floor for the old products. So when there's no competition and the patent expires, the government regulators say, well, prices maybe should come down by 15% or 30%, and the result is that new product prices in Europe are about half what they are in the United States, but old product prices are 2 to 3 times higher. So the key is you get what you pay for. So if you want to pay for innovation, put in incentives for those companies that are successful bringing new products to the market, allow competition to set high prices. But you do have to save money. You do have to control budgets here. So save money on the old products, because you know they're going to be there. They're old products. The people making them don't have to make the investments in research. Let market competition drive those prices down very low. And every analysis I've seen by economists shows that the net of that is either a savings or no increase in healthcare costs. And it would be a much better policy for patients and for those who pay for the innovation in the economy.
I see your point, and I know that you are in conflict, at least with the European government here. But in principle, may I repeat the question? Besides the problem that you have explained, is your experience that the regulatory burden, the administrative burden in Europe for a company is stronger than in other parts of the world, or would you say it's more or less the same?
It's different. Well, my experience is Asia, North America, and Europe all have some forms of regulation. It tends to be those companies that are highly regulated tend to have the least innovation. Those companies that are free to compete, and this is exactly the right attitude. You're thrown into cold water. You have to compete, and that's what drives behavior to reduce cost and compete with quality and price.
Yeah. Let me try to answer your question. I mean, I'm also sitting in the US in this or that board. I see a trend in the United States that the regulation is increasing, especially in the financial world. Sarbanes-Oxley and others were, a dramatic increase of regulation. I mean, the increasing of thousands of jobs within a regulatory body. And what do? The young people coming from the Harvard or so, they just regulate from the morning to the evening, and they go into so much detail you can't imagine. So that is one trend. So then in the airline thing, I mean, Europe is struggling with the United States on the airline issue, open skies, etc., etc. And we don't see any move in the United States, but in Europe, much deregulation. I will not say that the regulation in Europe is decreasing. Maybe it's stable, which is not a good judgment into my mind. But in US, I think there is an increasing trend.
Well, I can promise you I tried to change that. I made it my personal trademark that there will be less red tape and less bureaucracy in Europe after 5 years. Now we will see what we can. But Patricia, you have more experience with that. Because can you? Well, but the question is a little bit specific. Would you believe that lighter regulation, simplification of legislation, sunset clauses, proper impact assessment, everything, that it is something that could contribute to more growth and more employment?
It does seem to me the issue here is not regulation or no regulation, but it is, do we have better or worse regulation? And indeed, when I look at the United States and talk to British business colleagues operating there, and indeed American business colleagues operating in Britain, I mean, they point to considerable regulation and even more litigation in the United States. In complex modern societies, there will always be regulations, and indeed our consumers will absolutely demand that. But what we have to do, I believe, in government and at the European Union level as well, is use every one of the, if you like, better regulation or deregulation disciplines that certainly we've used in Britain, the Netherlands, the OECD's been looking at, some in Washington and so on, where you say, first of all, what's the objective here we're trying to achieve? Secondly, can we achieve it without regulation? Can we do better through a self-regulatory model or voluntary agreements between industry and, for instance, in the case of the car sector, the European Commission? If we do believe we need regulations, then let us start with a very rigorous impact of costs and benefits. And an example of where there was a real danger of that not being done was the proposal for a European Chemicals Directive, REACH, which will be familiar to some of you. And the original proposal, very well motivated, seeking to to improve protection for human health and for the environment, would have been a complete disaster. Massive increase in costs, massive increase in animal testing, quite unnecessary, and therefore a real risk of losing a large part of Europe's chemical industry to offshoring. Now, we've changed that. We now also have a new Commission, so I think the attitude of the Commission on this has changed. But the Member States, and certainly France, Germany, ourselves, with large chemicals industries, came together with our industrial leaders and our trade unionists, all agreed on the objectives, but not on the means to achieve them. And now Britain, and indeed a new member, Hungary, have led the way in proposing an alternative form of the regulation which is now being discussed. So there are disciplines we can use which the Commission absolutely has to adopt, and those include a competitiveness test for new regulations, but frankly we should apply it to a lot of the existing ones as well, to see whether we're achieving real benefits here or whether we're achieving notional or marginal benefits at an unacceptable cost to competitiveness. Sunset clauses, there are many different disciplines here. I think sunset clauses have a role to play. I wouldn't apply them to absolutely everything, but clearly they have a role to play. But the really crucial thing is, what are the outcomes you want and what are the costs and benefits of using regulation, and not simply to fall into the trap that both national governments and the European Union have fallen into of seeing a problem and then reaching for a regulation, because you can end up making your overall problems far worse. And I sense, particularly with the new Commission, a real change of mood on that subject in Europe now.
Yes, thank you. It appears that we are moving the same direction now. But Dr. Merkel, in that context, and the country we both know best at least, but in some other countries as well, it appears that we have a very serious problem with entrepreneurship, the spirit of entrepreneurship. So we both know that it is very complicated, at least people say it is very complicated to start a business in a European country. There is the problem with access to finance, but also all the bureaucratic obstacles are too high. You need too many rubber stamps in order to start it. Could you think that it would be possible to change that? And how could you foresee how entrepreneurship, private initiative, could be strengthened in our systems?
I think I start with saying that it's very necessary that the new Commission really sets priorities. And setting priorities also means that every directive or each directive which wants to be born from the general direction, that this is in the very beginning checked whether it fits to these priorities or whether it does not fit. Because the truth is that in the last 20 years, I guess, national politicians went to Brussels, and if they knew somebody who could help him to fulfill his wish, what he could never reach in his homeland, in his own nation, then he tried to make it via Brussels, because if it once raised to the Commission, then it's in the world, and then somehow it has to be treated, and you can never bring it to disappear. And because I have been environmental minister, I know this business very well. Because sometimes we didn't reach things in Germany, and then we put it through Brussels, and then it came out as a disaster for priorities. So, and therefore, there has to be a check at the very beginning. And if you ask me about business and entrepreneurship, I think it's different also in the European countries. You cannot say that the attitude is the same in Germany and in Britain or Netherlands and Scandinavia. Our danger is that the less innovative branches we have, the less we care to the proper priorities. If we lose research, for me the example is this REACH, this chemistry directive, would never have been had never come out in that way if it would be a German commissioner, because he is used to have chemical industry. If you have a Scandinavian commissioner who never saw chemical industry, it's no wonder that he thinks that one has to be very careful. So you need broad experience in a lot of branches in Europe, as hopefully in all the countries, that you get also the experience that it is worthwhile to take some risks. You will not have business if you do not take some risks also, because you cannot predict how it develops. And I think our European, or I speak about German attitude. The German attitude is if somebody once failed, then it is a disaster, and that there is not the thinking always stand up once more, then you fall down. And this has to be an European attitude. Encourage people to take a risk, make them that easy. And then I think if we have this kind of thinking, we will also overcome all the regulation questions.
Thank you. When we started our debate this afternoon, we learned that our American friends believe that Europe should stick to the commitment, to the intention to be the most dynamic, most competitive, knowledge-based, you said, knowledge-based economy in the world. This was, for me, I must say, a little bit surprising, but very, very encouraging.
You like competition?
Yes. It's obvious. But that raises the question of why is Europe slower than US, for instance, when it comes to innovation? And I would like to concentrate the next round, and then I would open the floor to the audience, to concentrate on the issue of research, development, innovation, and skills. And perhaps this time we start the other side, and I would like to ask Patricia, what your view is. What is the future of the European economy being squeezed between strong demographic change and strong delocalization of industrial jobs? The obvious answer, everybody says that, the obvious answer is we have to be better, and our products must be better, our quality must be better, we have to have the best technology. But this is very nice, but is it possible? How can we do that?
Dr. Merkel was talking a little bit earlier about the history of innovation. You were talking within Germany. One could make that even a more general European point. But, of course, that history, to some extent, has been holding us back. And I think the very big challenge for us is to recognize that we've got some great national strengths within the European Union. I mean, one could point to Germany's outstanding engineering skills, for just one example, Britain's absolutely outstanding universities and science base for another. But no one country within the European Union, even Germany or Britain, is anywhere near big enough to offer the kind of scale and critical mass that the United States can offer. And China and India are rapidly growing. That, indeed, is part of the whole point of the European Union. So I think part of the challenge for us in Europe is to say, how can we grow that critical mass of scientific excellence, but also, crucially, the science-business collaborations that produce the innovation that we need. So we've got to do that, and actually, to bring it to specifics, the seventh framework program, the R&D program that the Commission's currently engaged in, is very important. We need more of that Europe-wide collaboration. But the other thing we have to do is to recognize that science, modern science, and innovation within corporations increasingly is global. It doesn't happen within just one country or even one regional, trading in one single market. And so I think we need to foster a much more global, much more outward-looking European attitude, which promotes those international collaborations as well. We're going to have to be benchmarking ourselves increasingly against China and India and the other emerging economies, as well as against the United States. And frankly, one of the best ways of doing that is to partner with them in joint ventures focused around science, innovation and product development.
Ms. McKinnell.
There are some important differences, many of them culturally, actually, between Europe and the United States. It's not really scale. There's more population in Europe than there is in the United States. It's certainly not education. Europe in general, in primary education, does better than the United States, I'm ashamed to say. In fact, we compensate for our poor education system by importing better students from Europe, so it works. But the cultural difference I find very fascinating. I come out of a mathematical engineering background, and I believe that any system is perfectly designed to produce its output. So if you want to change the output, you've got to change the system. And when you come to changing the system, the European kind of cultural response is, well, we need a new directive. Like it's the job of government to create innovation. The United States, we recognize that innovation occurs at night while the government sleeps. We allow the private sector to do that. And the American dream is found your own company and get really rich. The European dream kind of isn't that anymore. In fact, that's almost socially unacceptable. And if you take a high-risk business and make it high-risk, high-reward, you've at least got a chance of succeeding. But if you take a high-risk business and make it high-risk, low-reward, you're guaranteed to fail. So I don't see the problems in Europe as being lack of education, lack of investment in science, lack of government effort to create innovation. I just think that there has to be a trust in the private sector and a trust in the free market competition and regulation that doesn't seem to be a natural response in Europe.
That's a very interesting point. I shouldn't intervene, but I have to say that what I see is that private spending for research in Europe is decreasing and is only compensated by a very slow increase of public spending. But would you agree, Dr. Merkel, with the analysis we got from Ms. McKinnell?
Yes. I think the cultural background is very, very important, and we have a tendency, at least in Germany, we had a tendency, as I understand it, in the last 30 years, let's say, when the living standard grew up after the Second World War due to the social market economy. In the beginning, everybody wanted to use his chance. And the taking risk was a general phenomenon which was accepted and also admired in the society. Then, suddenly, there was a certain level reached, and then there started a discussion about risks, and the chances went somehow into the background. And then we had a division of the society somehow that the engineers and the natural scientists did not anymore explain to the population where are the chances. They had their specific language not understood by the rest of the I overestimate a little bit, but not understood by most of the people. And the sociologists and all these political sciences, they felt very well in criticizing what's going on there on the natural science side. So we have a division of the society. One is responsible for criticizing, asking questions, and so on, and the others are put more and more into the edge. And I think we have to put the society again together and to say, if we want to have, as societies, as countries, as Europe, chances, then it's not only the business of the engineers to do something and the rest thinks the electricity comes out of, I don't know how is it in English, out of the plug or something like that. And the others say, okay, but we need it in another way, and so on and so on. So, and this is, from my point of view, the first thing. And the second is the situation that in a lot of European countries we spend each year more than we earn. And if you do that, and then you have the demographic problem, you come into a situation that you have not any more money enough for investments into the future technologies. And if I see how it develops in Germany, and it started also under our government, I do not want to blame only the government now, but if you come and you have investment rates lower than 10%, then of course you cannot build the world of the 21st century. So we have to teach our people that it is not acceptable to spend each year 3% more money than we earn. And we do it each year. And this is not okay for the last 25 years.
Mr. Zumwinkel, Is your sector innovative? I mean, you bring one parcel from point A to B. This is, seems to be a very simple technology. It's not, obviously.
Well, I'm happy to be in a 500-year-old industry. Yes, we survived many cycles. But I'm optimistic on Europe. You know, we have this new commission. We have a vice president in charge of industry and competitiveness. That is a good sign that we concentrate on that. But I see just especially what Hank said. What are the risks? The risk lies in the labor market we have. You know, wealth and innovation come from labor and capital, and let me concentrate on the labor market. The labor market in most of the countries in Europe are just going in the wrong direction, not only in the figures, high unemployment, etc. We are doing the worst thing you can do, and many economists, especially at the MIT and other institutions in your country, are saying, we have a surplus of labor, and normally if you have a surplus of something, you decrease prices. But we put all the heavy money spending we have on health, on other things, pensions, etc., we put on the labor factor. So, for example, in my company, if I pay my people 100 euro, I have to pay 110 on top of it for healthcare, for pensions, unemployment benefits, insurance, etc., 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 etc. And we work in 220 countries. I know that is the highest thing. And we do just the wrong thing, that we say we have to increase the price of labor by 110%. So it's so easy to say and to diagnose. I mean, it's the first chapter in an economic textbook, so to say. But what can one do with all these billions, hundreds of billions spent for all these things coming out of surcharge on the labor? The only answer is indirect taxes. And some Eastern European countries are doing that and showing that to us. So we have to increase the indirect taxes, the value-added taxes, etc., etc., in many countries in continental Europe to pay for that, and then to decrease, the surcharges on the labor. I mean, also, that's easy to say, but that's the only way out of these stupid things we are doing sometimes in healthcare reform, up and down, and this budget and that budget, etc. And when people learn to get used to all these tricks to get the money out of the healthcare, then the regulators found a new regulation system where the people have to learn for 1 year, to learn new tricks. So the only way out is to decrease the tax on labor and to increase tax on other things. Otherwise, we will never get out of this unemployment trap where we are in, and everybody is complaining. So I think that is one of the things we have to do in Europe to get out of this trap of unemployment and to reward innovation more, and not for a young entrepreneur who wants to hire 5 new people. He is confronted with the risk, well, you cannot fire these researchers for the next 5 years. Thank you.
I could do a test now and ask Dr. Merkel what she feels about indirect taxation 3 weeks before an important state election. And no, I don't do that because it makes no sense. But
I'm skillful enough to find a non-answer, so it's nice that you do that.
But taxation obviously is an issue. The question of tax competition, how much tax competition can we accept? You know that some member states have difficulties with the very low tax rates in the new member states. But perhaps we can have a final round here on the issue of taxation, state aid in that context, and the role of public spending. In particular, the role of the community budget for growth and employment. Perhaps I can start again with Patricia Hewitt, representing a country that is very much against the idea of tax harmonization in Europe. Will that be the case forever?
It certainly will be for as long as we are the government, and I think it's unlikely that any other government that I can see on the horizon in Britain would be in favour of tax harmonisation. But, let me just explain a little bit here. I think it is utterly legitimate for society in each country to make a judgment through the political process about what level of taxation they want and what level of social and public services they're going to get in return for that taxation. And we have within the European Union, notably in the Scandinavian countries, some countries with very high taxation compared with the United States or indeed with Britain, and very high levels of socially provided healthcare, social services, childcare, and so on. And actually, if you look at Sweden, for instance, it's also pretty economically successful. It's got a lot of people in employment, significantly more than the average for the Eurozone. So that's a perfectly legitimate choice for them to make. Then, earlier on today, I was listening to the president of Latvia, one of our new member countries. They've recently chosen to cut their corporation tax to 15% because they have the lowest per head income in the whole of the European Union, and after decades of communism, they are desperate for investment. They've cut that tax rate. They got a lot of criticism from one or two older member states as a result. They've increased their tax take, and they've made themselves very attractive to foreign investment, and Ireland would be a similar story. So, and we have our own view about where it's appropriate to set our taxation, and we've put that within the context of very tough rules. Our golden rule that we will only borrow for purposes of investment, and we will balance the budget over the cycle. Now, these are utterly legitimate choices for national societies to make through the political process of electing their government. And I think it is wrong in principle if the European Union were to try and impose tax harmonisation. Certainly we would not sign up to that, and under the proposed new constitutional treaty, I'm glad to say, we won that argument. The taxation matters do have to be decided by majority, by unanimity, and therefore we or anybody else could veto proposals on that. But I'd make a further point that, and this is a point towards my colleagues who are in the single currency, that within a single currency, where you no longer have the flexibility of being able to vary your interest rate to deal with different shocks to different national economies, it seems to me all the more necessary that you have fiscal flexibility to deal with different shocks and different conditions within different national economies. And so actually, both the argument of political principle, if you like, and subsidiarity, and the argument from economics within a single currency, or more broadly an increasingly integrated single market, also says that you should leave these tax matters to national governments.
I should add, perhaps, Patricia, that the countries you have mentioned, like Slovakia, Latvia, Lithuania, the cutting of the corporate tax rate was only one element. Indeed. They have, of course, considerably increased the personal income tax, yes, and the VAT, and, for me, the most important thing, they have effectively abandoned all tax exemptions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
lower taxes, but what he pays.
And then the
Absolutely.
result in Lithuania was, for instance, in the first year after the reform, the income for the state from that tax reform was 3 times as much as before. Dr. Merkel, you wanted to comment on that?
Yes, I wanted to comment because these countries did nothing else than buying German tax professors' books and doing what was written there. And it is a quite funny story that if our new member states do just what German scientists found out, And then there is the German politicians complain about that. And but this is the situation which we have now. So, so what I wanted to add is Mr. Verheugen spoke in the beginning about competition has to have a chance in Europe. And how can we create competition? Of course, we need variables where the member states can choose or make a choice. And for me, these taxes are one of these elements or variables where they can make the choice and then look what happens. Because if we have equal conditions over the European Union for businesses, then we need for the countries to have, or for the situation to have competition within Europe. From my point of view, this tax system, and so I would agree upon also the British position, although I do not agree in all European positions with the British positions, that this should be not regulated by the Commission. The question is whether one talks about the fundaments, what is counted as taxes and so on, but no regulation and no harmonization.
Yeah. To close that once and forever.
Is that the opinion of the Commission as well?
Yeah, but I say that once and forever, at least for the present Commission. We are galaxies away from harmonization taxes. The only thing we consider is the harmonization of the corporate tax base, which is what you have, said, and would make it much easier for a cross-border business in Europe to operate, but it's the only thing that is considered. The rest you can forget. Mr. McKinnell, if you have to decide on an investment in Europe, is there taxation in Europe, state aid systems in Europe, flexibility of the labor markets in Europe? Are those criteria which are leading principles, guidelines for your decision?
Well, labor productivity, the appropriate labor being available is certainly one of the things we look at, and quite frankly, around the major European countries, all pass the minimum test. Some may be a little better than others, but you could basically put a modern pharmaceutical plant anywhere in Europe. Two things really make a difference. One is the environment in that country friendly towards an investment? When somebody is destroying my business, why would I put a plant there and hire people there? It's maybe not a sound economic analysis, but it's a very emotional, real analysis. But tax rates are important. That in the end, wherever the plant is, you tend to realize about the same level of profit, and if tax rates are significantly lower, that quite often can be a deciding factor. Ireland being the case in point. So I think the Irish example leads me to the opposite conclusion that we're talking about here. I think I could make a better case for cutting tax rates than increasing tax rates, particularly on labor, to this point. We think about unemployment as amongst the young. In fact, the highest unemployment in Europe by far is those between 50 and 65. It's an enormous problem. You've got the most experienced, productive, innovative part of your workforce not working. And it's in the 70s, 80, 90%. It's several fold larger than other economies. And that's a real problem. You've got your most experienced workers off, not without a job, not earning income, not paying taxes. In fact, instead of paying money into the government, they're receiving money back from the government. So I think the way to break through this is to significantly lower tax rates, stimulate the economy. I don't see inflationary pressures anywhere I look, and significantly increase employment, specifically amongst that 50 to 65 group, which are your most experienced workers.
Speaking as a 50-something-year-old, I mean, one of the reasons why we have such high unemployment amongst the 50-somethings and the early 60-somethings, and I see this all the time in my own constituency, is actually if you put your age on your job application, as most employers require, an awful lot of employers simply won't offer you an interview, never mind a job. So, there are challenges here for employers as well to understand that actually it is in their interests to be recruiting from the whole of the potential talent pool, absolutely including those innovative and experienced 50-something-year-olds and older workers, but I could make a similar point in relation to women and certainly to the black and ethnic minorities, for instance, in my own country. And we've shown over the last few years, we've significantly increased employment amongst the over 50s, but we've still got quite a long way to go. We can reform our own welfare state to incentivize that employment, but we also need employers just to be a bit more age blind than they are at the moment.
But if I may say, what was the answer of the European Union to that fact? The answer was an anti-discrimination directive, which is now implemented in Germany, even stronger than it came out from Brussels. And it will have just the opposite effect if you want to solve such a problem by a directive. And this is what I would say has to be changed in the Commission. And what we have to discuss, I think it was very interesting that it was mentioned that we lose experience. And if you lose experience from all of the people who are over 50, they study until 30, then they start to work, and with 50 they are thrown out of the companies. And so you lose a lot of experience, of course, and this may cost us a lot. What we have to discuss, I know that, but I heard it from the United States, I don't know whether they do it really. So we have an understanding that with the age, your salary has to increase up to the end. And this, of course, that makes the tendency that there is some tendency to put the people who are older out. And maybe we have to think also about this, whether this is really a law that it has to happen in that way.
Yeah. Mr. Zumwinkel, you are leading a company with a lot of experience in that, huh?
Well, the opposition leader now to Patricia, I think the politicians, with the help of the unions, designed the system, the labor market. Yeah? And the system is very inflexible. And you cannot say that that is the employer's thing to hire the 50 years old. Yes, we have to sign the contract. Yeah? But the whole system is designed against these people. Even in my country and in other countries, in France, there were incentives to send the 50-year-old people home. Yeah, you got money from some agencies, you know, if you send them home, you get money, and if you employ the young ones, you get another incentive. So incentives or penalties, maybe there are some functionaries asking for that.
Companies
yeah. But the system has to be designed in a different thing. So the deregulation of the labor market, I think, that has to be done especially in continental Europe. I think UK is more advanced in that, you know, maybe not in the Royal Mail sector, in the mail sector, but they are learning fast. Yeah?
Royal Mail
they
is
are
now
learning fast under your guidance. Yeah? But in continental Europe, we have this tradition which was very much okay after the Second World War. But now in a global competitive mode, you know, just before our session here, there were the Chinese people sitting in this panel. I mean, we should send many of our union leaders to China. I heard that from the Singapore minister. You know, they are incentivizing trips from Singapore to China to go into the factories. You know, I learned a lot. I mean, maybe we should do in continental Europe the same. So, in a nutshell, I think we have to design the system, the labor market, in a very much different way. And that will help on a lot on this Lisbon agenda.
I think now we are very, very close to the real core of the issue, and I'm a little bit sad that we have to close now relatively sooner, but I want to give the audience the possibility to ask some questions. I would only like to say that in my own experience in the last couple of weeks is very similar. There are clear Pavlov reflexes in the European public. If you use the term flexibility of the labor market, you are immediately accused of producing devilish neoliberal fundamentalist policies. That the term, even the term, is under taboo in Europe, and I have seen the same. Even I was completely surprised to learn when I said very innocently that now the new Commission is putting emphasis, first priority, policy for growth and employment. I expected that everybody would applaud and say, fine, now we have a Commission that wants growth and employment. The direction was completely different. People say, shit, there is a Commission that will not care for social cohesion and environmental protection. So, with that, I ask the audience, we might have time perhaps for 3 questions, so they have to be chosen very carefully. It's difficult for me to see against the light here. If you make yeah, please, yeah, first row.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Would you introduce yourself?
I certainly will. Digby Jones, I'm Director General of the Confederation of British Industry. Just factually for 1 minute, Mr. Zumwinkel, to spare her blushes, the UK government did take with 3 businessmen and 4 trade union leaders a delegation to the Chinese factories in Shenzhen and Shanghai. And I can remember coming out with one of the major union leaders, and as we walked out he said, "We're all doomed." And so I think it worked. The title of this was The Missing Engine of Growth. And I would put it down to 3 things. One thing that's missing is backbone, courage. One thing missing is another group of people who don't care for the people they're elected to represent. And one thing that is missing is a lack of understanding of the complete culture change of globalization. The backbone I put down to the political leaders of the European Union, because no matter how many businesses try to change, no matter what the Commission say, no matter how many times a political leader in any national state will say, I believe in change and I believe in reform, they don't do it. Very few of them do it. They don't have the political courage to stand up to their own electorate and change. I put down to trade union leaders the fact that they are elected to look after those workers in Europe, and if they carry on the way there won't be any jobs for those workers in Europe, and they ought to shift their agenda to making sure employers, public sector employers as well as private sector employers, actually skill and train their people better so they move into the jobs of tomorrow and stop trying to keep the jobs of today. And lastly, and Chairman, you're not going to like this, but we do have a commission in the past, I sincerely hope the new commission, I'm very optimistic it'll change, that has been marching valiantly towards 1970. And they subscribe to the broken leg theory of Europe. If one country has a broken leg, then instead of trying to mend its broken leg, it makes sure that every other country breaks its leg as well. And then what we can all do is we can all be equal and we can all have prizes. And in the great race of globalization, we come last. And what we have to do is push the whole agenda in Brussels to finding the best in class and taking everybody else up to the best in class. It might be Britain's labour market flexibility. It might be France's education system. It might be Germany's engineering capability. Whatever it is, it might be Latvia's tax competitiveness. We should pushing the whole of Europe up to the best in class, because otherwise India will have your lunch and China will have your dinner. Instead of which, we say, oh, have you got an advantage over me? Well, I think I'll break your leg to make sure you haven't. And that, Chairman, is your missing engine of growth in Europe.
Thank you. Who wants to comment? Yes, please. Third row there. Yeah.
My name is Dan Musica. I'm a professor of entrepreneurship, and actually in 1990 I was the first, or actually one of the first professors of entrepreneurship in Europe at INSEAD. There are a couple of observations that I have based on the conversation that I'd like to relay. One is that the European Commission needs to look very carefully at the study it commissioned regarding university resources. It commissioned a study, and it showed very clearly that European universities didn't have the endowments and the resources of many of the American competitors. And I think it's absolutely critical to address that if you want to boost innovation. The second is that Europe does have an issue regarding entrepreneurship vis-a-vis the transaction costs for entrepreneurs. the transactions costs in starting a business are actually quite profound. One study we did in the 1990s showed that in surveying entrepreneurs that in some countries in Europe, they had to do as many as 35 different transactions to start a business. The average in the US was 3. By the way, there is one correction in the last few years. In one country where it was 35, they added an extra ministry to file to some of the other ministries. It reduced the transactions cost down to 10, but it didn't reduce the amount of regulation. I guess the third thing that is, in a way, disturbing for me, I'm currently at the University of British Columbia. Back in 1992, the European Commission noted that attitudes towards success and failure, cultural attitudes, educational attitudes towards success and failure were both difficult in a European context and held Europe back from entrepreneurship and realizing the entrepreneurship it could have. The same statements were made this past, I think, November, that said attitudes towards success and failure are difficult. My question is, how do you cure that? How do you deal with the cultural attitudes towards success and failure?
Cultural habits die very slowly. But the problem is well known, and we try to develop something, but it's a little bit too early to give you an answer. But we really have analyzed the problem, and I personally believe that the first step should be to encourage entrepreneurship and to underline that private initiative has an added value for the society. You know, that a modern society builds on private initiative, on entrepreneurship, on the ability to take risk. But this is something that politicians must do in order to change. Yeah, I must say the mindset that we have in our society. So I would like to take one other contribution from the audience. Yeah, should be fair. Left center here.
I'm Herbert Hensler from Credit Suisse. I was running the Commission Against Bureaucracy in Bavaria last year. A couple of observations. Mr. Verheugen, your Brussels institutions are the most complicated entity when it comes to issuing directives. Europe has a backbone of medium-sized companies, and we did analysis. Small companies typically have bureaucracy costs of around 5%. Medium-sized companies between 2 to 3.2%, and large companies around 1%. The 5% are significantly more than what they make. The medium-sized companies won't grow on account of bureaucracy, and the big problem we're having, we've done many interviews, is the directives are made with the meaning in mind, one size fits all. And when you have a structure where medium-sized companies and small companies, in Germany alone over 2 million, are stopping to operate more and more, giving up because they don't make any money, then we have a problem. And that's something you should recognize. And it's sunset laws, and it's throwing out 3 directives. If you have every new one, we had made many proposals. We're getting there in Bavaria. But anything that goes to Berlin or goes to Brussels is a big problem. Second thing, entrepreneurship. I'm afraid to say, a generation ago in Germany, we had 20% of the people self-employed, and 9% of the people in 8% of the people in government services. Today, we have 16% in government services. We doubled that, and we halved the self-employment. We have 9%, 9.5. Now, Hank McKinnell, anything like that would indicate that we have a willingness to portray that being an entrepreneur is the model you go for. It isn't. Our students don't see people who are not government employed. Our pupils don't. So, you know, every now and then you have to follow the rule that there must be role models which are cherished, which are helped, which are enhanced, and then you'll get it. Thank you.
Here we come. One final short remark from everybody here, starting with, but very short, please. Soundbite.
Well, I'm a little bit more optimistic. I think if we send our people outside to other countries, they come back with fresh ideas, etc. So I'm not so pessimistic on Europe. Was it too short?
No, I too am optimistic, because when a system is broken, it's not sustainable, and something that's not sustainable eventually will change. It's taking a long time, but clearly this system is broken. It's particularly broken in healthcare, and it's time to try something different.
I think to change the culture, we have to remember that evolution always goes with the principle of trial and error. So we have to accept that also with respect to failure of companies, and teach the people that from the very beginning. And I think the remark on the small size companies was quite interesting, and we have to keep that in mind, because it's the backbone, and it's the first step also of the existence of a company, and so we have to be very careful about these companies.
Patricia?
Changes are happening in Europe. They need to happen a great deal faster. And for the new Commission especially, of whom I think we all have very high hopes, I would offer just two mantras, two slogans to keep in mind all the time: less is more, and think small first. Picking up on your point, if you have to regulate, design it for a small firm. If they can cope with it, it'll be okay.
Well, Christmas is next week. And we will, Commission will next week present not an analysis, clear-cut proposals for a strategy for growth and employment in Europe, based on very clear principles: competitiveness, flexibility, reform-mindedness. Reform-minded, very crucial. The problem, in my view, will be that this time we don't have a second shot. This time we must meet the target. And I think there was a very broad agreement here where the problems are and what needs to be done. We have not discussed the delivery mechanism, which is in our political system the true, and in my view, the most important weakness. That would be the other part of the issue. The European Union is a decentralized system. We are not a centralized system. We are not a central state, and we never want to be one. And there will always be certain problems of efficiency. We cannot avoid that in a system that respects the sovereignty and independence of its member states. So it will never be so effective as a centralized country could be. But I'm absolutely convinced that we have very, very strong potential for being more focused, more effective, more targeted than we have been in the past. It was a privilege for me to moderate that meeting. Some of you might know that I'm a professional journalist, and I hope that the journalist present here will not write that again Verheugen proved that he was better as a journalist than as a politician. Thank you. Thank you very much.